Hello, my name is Walter Pereira, and this is my older adult oral video presentation. Before I go into the presentation itself, I'd like to let you guys know that I interviewed a former client of mine for this project. She is a 77-year-old woman who identifies being from Portugal, but also identifies as American due to living in the States for the past 50 years or so. To describe the development stage, I chose from Erickson's theory. I chose the intimacy versus isolation stage. In this stage, an individual is trying to find the virtue of love. Within this stage, individuals are between the ages of 18 and 40. For this interview, she was basically focused within that time frame. I believe that's because, by what she said, that's where a lot of the changes went on for her. This is a sixth stage of development. It is basically the battle between finding love, a relationship, somebody else outside the family framework versus being unsuccessful in finding a relationship, ending up isolated, and then with maybe depressed, anxiety, and stuff like that. Some important experiences in her life. She definitely experiences loneliness during her 20s. She was a single mother of two children. She was always busy working as a house cleaner. Never had time to date until her 30s. She was never to go out and look for a date. She said the men that she met was always presented to her like from friends of friends. Um, she had a troubled relationship with her son and daughter as they grew older. Most likely stems from a relationship with her mother. During the interview, she reported that she was sent to work at an early age and dropped out of school in the sixth grade. Let me go back a little bit. Um, she did state that when she moved to the United States, she only moved with her younger daughter, and left her oldest son in Portugal. Um, so that's why I bring into the fact that trouble relationship might stem from the relationship with her mother because she actually stated that she didn't see it. She never saw it as a big deal. Up to this day, she doesn't see it as a big deal for her oldest son to be left alone. Um, she stated she was barely there physically with her own children, which led to the disconnection between her and her children. And I reference Hadiwia et al. 2019 as this because she talks about the relationship between parents and how they affect future relationships. Um, so finally, she gets married around her late 30s. But after the marriage, her husband decides to move to Germany. In Germany, she lived there until she was 62. Unfortunately, her husband passed away by the time she was 62, and due to not having any family in Germany, she moved back to the United States to live with her daughter. Some difficult challenges and accomplishments during this developmental stage for the interviewee. She reported a number of events which were difficult to accomplish or overcome. She reported she moved from Portugal to the United States when she was 24 years old with a young daughter. She left her oldest son back home until she had enough money to bring him overseas. She reported that being a single mother in America was different than being one in Portugal. Back home, she was able to open and maintain a grocery type of convenience store. But in the United States, she felt as people always looked down at her. She had difficulty finding a job when she first moved, and she states that she was lucky to find a family who employed her and paid her well at that time. By the time she was 40, her husband herself, they moved to Germany, like I mentioned earlier. Um, Again, it might seem that she found her her intimacy. She might have accomplished it, but at the same time, she reported that she was also battling with loneliness because the move to Germany meant she was not going to be around family. She was not going to be around her community that she was used to already all these years. Um, so she did mention, she stated that she did not want to move. Her daughter and son was in the States by that time. Her sister and mother was here also. She said they had a huge argument and went on for a couple of weeks. But at the end, her husband convinced her, and for the next 20 or so years, she lived in Germany. Again, with the big moves, she faced language barriers all over again, isolation from her family members, and so forth. This was a new stressor for her for the first 5 years or so of this married life of hers. And in this situation, I decided to reference Sarang et al. 2019 because they also talk about these barriers. The psychosocial crisis found in this stage of development is intimacy versus isolation. So basically, during this stage, the conflict is being experienced is battling between finding lasting loving relationships and being lonely. The interviewee reviewed how she faced isolation when she moved to the United States. Due to being a single mother and due to not having any time to date because she worked all the time, she didn't really go out, had no social life, and at the time really didn't have family, but actually like a community that backed her up. She did find intimacy when she was in her later years, basically. So once she met her husband, and then they moved to Germany. So I believe she did find her intimacy, but then due to knowing that her husband passed away, she, she might have lost it. Moving forward, psychosocial crisis resolution. The next slide of that. So some biopsychosocial factors. Um, so basically, some factors which inhibited her success in this development stage is basically first and foremost her language barrier. She had difficulty communicating with others. This was a huge barrier for her, especially to finding intimacy. She stayed within her culture community when she was not working. So when she first moved over here, she relied heavily on a community of basically people from Portugal that were already here. Being a single mother, she reported back in the 60s and the 70s, was looked down upon. So basically, she never felt welcomed where she was living because of the new sociological difference and cultural differences she was facing. Again, after marriage, she faced basically the same barriers she faced when she first moved to the United States. Big time with the cultural differences between her and her husband. She was very family orientated, big family. They ended up moving. Everybody basically ended up moving to the United States at a certain a point of time. But again, by this time, she was moving to Germany, which was a conflict within itself. She said it was an ordeal back when she finally made the decision to move for her. So she really, really, really did not want to move. It was something so they could keep the relationship going on. And I also put here that being determined is definitely a biopsychosocial factor because her determination, her attitude, made the relationship work between her and her husband. Not a lot of people will move overseas, especially nowadays. And she was able to basically conform to the life in Germany. The next slide, basically some more barriers that she faced. At that time, oppression towards immigrants has always been a problem. In her case, she had difficulties finding jobs as a secretary, store manager, and so forth. Again, she was used to being owning her own convenience store, her own shop. So coming here and working for somebody was like a shock to her. Coming here and not being able to find a secretarial job or manager job was also very impactful for her at that time. The only job she was able to find was cleaning, was the type of cleaning jobs. In her case, she was in the house cleaning business, um, and that's how basically she met through her husband through that, through her work, and was able to bring her family from Portugal to the United States through her work. Being a single mother also affected her employment opportunities. She said that she was able to bring her young child when needed to a house she will clean. Even nowadays, a lot of jobs won't allow you to bring a kid to work. A lot of liability. They don't know how the child might act But it's great hearing that she was able to find a family who was able to support her and a job that was able to be very flexible with her needs. Again, there were low paying jobs. That's why I did mention earlier she had like 3 or 4 families she was working for. She was working basically 7 days a week. She told me she was barely there to raise her own daughter. Um, so applying the multi-system lens theory to examine her life experience. To start off with, I couldn't find any policies or community programs that helped her really, or that she basically used. Government-wise, she stated she never used welfare or any type of government assistance. She always had a thought to go against that. The only help she did receive for her daughter was within her own community of immigrants where she resided at that time. So they helped her by giving her credit for food, people who owned supply stores there, credit for supplies. There were friends, family members who helped take care of her daughter, so that helped with babysitting needs and stuff like that. Employers also influenced her. She started dating, I'm guessing, at some point in her life. And again, this is how she met her husband through her working experience. And again, these are all factors that helped her with the battle between intimacy and loneliness. At the end, we did find out that she did find her intimacy, she did find her relationship. This slide is to use an additional theoretical perspective to explain Erickson's why I chose Erickson's development stage with my interviewee. So Cap's pastoral perspective is one of the reference I use for this project by Zog 2018. So I'll start off with a quote. So basically, Caps said that the Bible provides a narrative foundation for the life cycle. Again, Zog 2018. So, Cap views development as going through stages of sin versus virtues and also has a 10 decades of life theory. His theory basically stems from Erickson's developmental theory. That's why I basically chose this article, this journal, and this theory to use for this project. But again, within his theory, it adds older adult stages and changes their virtues around the different stages. Capps likewise adds 2 psychosocial issues he attributes to very old age: release versus control, resulting in the virtue of grace for the 9th decade, and desire versus struggle, resulting in the virtue of endurance for the 10th decade. Here we see that Capps builds further on the theory of the life cycle, taking into account both of the changes to social cultural context. People are living much longer today than 80 years ago, and his own experiences with aging. So that's basically an example of a little difference between his 10 decades of life theories and Erickson's 8 developmental changes stages. So basically, using an interviewing, she used to go to church during that time of her life. She used to go every weekend with her community, but church was never really her main priority, so it wasn't really her thing. Um, so if she was more involved with church, I believe Cap's pastoral perspective theory would basically definitely work with her, help her out, and she might have a better community support because she was seeking help from the church itself. Theory limitations within Caps. Again, church wasn't really her a big deal. She also mentioned she never really ever asked for help. To this day, she doesn't like asking for help. She doesn't even like to ask her own daughter for help. So at the end of the day, she does believe in God, but she did say she does not believe in the church. So basically, that's a huge limitation within Cap's their vertical perspective on her situation. So that was the end of my project, my presentation. Hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully you learned something new. These are my references, what I used throughout the project. I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'd like to say have a great night.